Hi, I'm Carol Rafferty, Policy Manager at Scottish Widows. I'm delighted to be joined today by Jonathan Lyme-Matthews, who's Public Affairs Manager at IPSE, Will Sandbrook, who is Executive Director at Nest Insight, and Pete Glancy, who's Head of Policy at Scottish Widows. There are now over 5 million self-employed people working in the UK, and that population are doing very little in terms of provision for retirement. The government are concerned and have set up a working party through the Department of Work and Pensions. Jonathan, Will and Pete are members of that working party, and over the course of this video you're going to explain to us a little bit about the nature of the issue and the work ongoing as part of the working group. Jonathan, the self-employed can be very different from employed people. Can you tell us a bit about the UK self-employed and their attitudes towards retirement savings?
Absolutely. So as you mentioned in your intro, there's almost 5 million self-employed in this country. They're very different from each other. Some are construction workers, some are copywriters, some are doctors, some are lawyers. So it's a very diverse group. There's no kind of one-size-fits-all approach that can be sort of applied to them when you're dealing with pensions. They've grown significantly since 2000 by almost 50%. And amongst women and other under-pension groups like millennials, amongst women, they've grown by around 57%, so that's faster than the rate of men. And amongst millennials, I think it's somewhere around the same region. In terms of their approach to saving for later life, saving saving for retirement, they do want to save for pensions. So around 67% said they're concerned. But what we know from IPSE's research is that only 31% are currently saving into a pension.
Thanks very much. Pete, earlier in the year, Scottish Widows undertook a major piece of research to get better understanding of the self-employed's attitudes towards retirement savings. What were the key findings?
Well, I think there was about 3 big things that jumped out for me. The first was that the self-employed are not comfortable with the concept of retirement. Many are doing a job that they really enjoy, and they don't want someone coming along and telling them they have to stop that at an arbitrary point in time. Another thing that jumped out was that the self-employed, even more so than employed workers, are looking for flexibility in terms of long-term savings. Flexibility on the way in, flexibility on the way out. The self-employed's earnings can fluctuate to a much greater degree than employed workers, so that flexibility in terms of when they make those contributions towards retirement on the way in. But also they may need to access money when opportunities come along to develop their business, and they don't really want to lock that money away up for many, many decades. And I think finally, the self-employed are not as familiar and comfortable with traditional savings and investment products. Many are looking at investing in buy-to-let property. They're familiar as entrepreneurs with the concept of getting an income or a return that they understand within the context of their local area. But we can't end up in a space where 5 million self-employed people own all of the nation's property and 20 million employed people are renting that from them.
Okay, great, thank you. Well, Nest Insights have recently completed a substantial research project. Can you tell us a bit about that and your key findings?
Yeah, of course. So we're actually part way through a longer term programme of research, and what we published in October was the set of findings from the first kind of couple of pieces of that research. So some a review of existing research literature and some qualitative research and also a quantitative survey. And really what we're looking for is trying to understand what kinds of interventions might change behaviour in this group, what might get them saving for the longer term. So a lot of what we found echoes what's been said already by Jonathan and Peter. We know that the self-employed by and large aren't currently saving for retirement but are worried about it and do perhaps think that they should be. We know that this issue of income volatility is a real barrier for people, so the self-employed tend to worry that the locked away nature of a pension may not be suitable for them and tend to be more likely to save in things like ISAs and cash savings accounts. And we also know that because of that volatility, flexibility is really important to them. So things like messages like that you can save what you want to when you want to in a pension that doesn't have to be a fixed amount can be quite powerful. So we found some of those things, and what we've started to then explore in the research is what are some of the messages that we might be able to use with the self-employed that build on some of those findings to start to get them to save for a pension. And some of the things that we think might be promising include, again, messages about control, telling people that they don't have to set the amount, that they can change the amount they save when they can afford it. And also messages about sort of feasibility, so encouraging people to think in small amounts, pounds per day, rather than large percentages of salary, we think might be helpful as well. So those are some things that we found in the first round.
Okay, that's interesting stuff. So those are the next steps you'll be taking. Is there anything else?
Yeah, so what comes next is then actually testing some of those hypotheses in the real world, as it were. So at the moment we're working on 2 live research projects, one actually with members of IPSI and one with members of Nest, which takes some of the messages that we found from the early work that we think could be helpful and tests them in the form of an outbound email campaign to lapsed members of Nest and people within IPSI who haven't taken up the pension provision there. And then what we're hoping to do after that is move on to some larger scale and more ambitious trials that actually start to get into what are the services that the self-employed use to manage their money, to manage their business, in particular some of the services they might use to take payments, so platforms like PayPal or point of sale payments mechanisms. What we're going to start to do is see whether we can find ways of helping the self-employed to create regular savings habits, a bit like payroll deduction, but using some of those platforms that they use to get paid. So that's the focus for us in the coming year.
Thanks for that. Jonathan, if there were 3 key things you'd like either the industry or government to do to support retirement planning for the self-employed, what would those be?
Absolutely. So I think the first thing to say is I think we feel at IPSI it really should be kind of a private sector-led approach. So the first couple of things I would call for from pensions providers like Scottish Widows would be to offer flexible solutions, and it kind of goes back to what Peter was saying earlier. You know, the self-employed really want flexibility. So what we want to see is things like the sidecar or like the Brit Saver that Scottish Widows put out in their recent report. But what people also in the self-employed community are saying is pensions are really inaccessible in terms of they're very confusing. If you don't have a kind of a financial background, you don't have an HR department to rely on to explain these sort of complex terminology to you. So we'd really like to see pension providers kind of breaking down those kind of barriers and offering people kind of plain English when they're kind of offering those solutions to them on their websites and policy documents and so on. And the last thing I would probably say in terms of government solutions would be to not roll out automatic enrolment to the self-employed. When we did our research a couple of years ago with self-employed people, we did a bit of survey work, and overwhelmingly the self-employed didn't want automatic enrolment. And we feel that at the point you roll out AE to the self-employed, it just stops being a kind of an automatic solution like it would be for employees. So we feel efforts would be better concentrated on, other solutions like the sidecar, the Brit Saver, or whatever else is out there.
Okay, it's really interesting. Thank you. Pete, final question. What else is the government doing, and what do you think is likely the way forward?
Well, I think there's a lot of research and learning still to be undertaken by the working group. The members of the working group are quite diverse. We're a small subset here today, and the diversity, I think, recognises the breadth of the challenge. I think there's probably 3 key areas. The solutions for the self-employed is probably a combination of financial services solutions and potentially reforms to labour laws. We've seen some changes in terms of IR35 recently, which are impacting on pension provision indirectly for the self-employed. It's not certain that pensions will be the backbone of the solution for all of the categories of self-employed that Jonathan was telling us about earlier. We may need to think more broadly about the right product structures for that community. But as Will also touched on, I think there's a lot to do in terms of the technology ecosystem. The employed auto-enrolment framework is built around the payroll industry, and I think there's test and learn work to be done in terms of potentially business banking, electronic payments, as Will touched on, potentially accountancy and invoicing ecosystem. So we need to test and learn and see what infrastructure works best and makes it convenient for the self-employed to save. And of course, a lot is going to depend on the government of the day.
Thanks, Pete, and also to Will and Jonathan. That was really informative. We hope that we've given you a bit of an insight over the course of this video into the nature of the issue and the work ongoing within the party. All our panellists have agreed to answer any specific questions, and their contact details should be on the screen now if anybody has any further questions. Thank you very much.